Uncharted, a swashbuckling series of games starring bestubbled adventurer Nathan Drake. They're exciting, funny, and most importantly, trustworthy. Unlike the dubiously titled The Last of Us and its many additional cast members, the Uncharted series would never lie to us. Nathaniel Drake really does only travel to places so remote and unknowable that no pen has ever been put to paper to chart them.
You got a map?
Yeah.
Okay, there's one map in the series, but...
I've got the map that's gonna lead us right to it.
Wait. No.
Maybe this map would help.
This series that seemed so wholesome and pure...
Just give him the map.
...was actually charted all along. Well, that's where I come in. So let's continue our very important work of discovering which gaming series are titled the most truthfully by analysing every single inch of this much beloved franchise for any illicit and unadvertised combinations of parchment and ink. In this extremely journalistic investigation, we'll be inspecting the original PlayStation 3 trilogy and ignoring all later Uncharted games as well as the spin-offs. Which sadly does mean we won't be looking at one of the most important and critically acclaimed games in the series, Uncharted Fortune Hunter for iOS and Android. We'll look at each game's individual chapters and judge if they live up to their Uncharted namesake by containing even a single section of truly Uncharted content. But how exactly are we deciding which areas of the game are indeed chart-free and which don't live up to that promise? Well, lucky for you, I've prepared the following commandments of chartedness, starting with the worst offence of all. A location is stripped of Uncharted status automatically if it is detailed by a map seen in-game. This could be a paper map, hand-drawn doodle, or any other weird and wonderful way to chart something. If a map covers a large space, such as a whole island, mountain range, or an entire lost city, all exteriors shown on that map become charted, so long as the details are big enough to be useful for navigation. So this world map from the main menu is too big, but this is just fine. GPS and satellite imagery does exist, but their usefulness is somewhat unreliable.
According to this, we're right on top of the mark.
And therefore we can't just label every location in the world as automatically charted. We'll only be counting an area as charted using this method if a character is actually seen using a satellite map on a monitor or using some other device in a similar way. Urban areas like major cities are also automatically stripped of Uncharted status, even if a map isn't seen on screen. Similarly, interiors are relieved of Uncharted status if they are a public or private space that is currently inhabited or was until recently, as an architectural drawing such as a blueprint, white print, or even a tourist map was likely created in its construction or drawn up later. Well, those are the rules that help us detect the dirty lies of secretly charted chapters. But we are gamers, a famously reasonable bunch, so we've also got some commandments dedicated to making it easier to declare spaces as uncharted. If a location is old enough, then it's assumed no charts survived from their construction, if one was even ever made. Therefore, such spaces are declared uncharted by default unless a map is shown. Similar to ancient spaces, secret areas of charted spaces are in the same boat, providing all knowledge of their existence was lost to time, such as a long-forgotten puzzle room, or the secret passages that lead to them. Well, that's our plan of action. So next, let's go over the most interesting results from all three games in detail, and finally reveal just how much the promise of the Uncharted series is an unforgivable fib. And rank it on this: the Backseat wall of gaming lies. No doubt you're already furious in anticipation of the result. So before all that easily exploitable anger fades, do remember to like this video and hit that subscribe button. A very smart choice. Well, with that out of the way, let's get charting. Right away at the very start of the first game, we run the risk of a chapter being charted. Judging by conversations between Drake and Elena, their boat is currently somewhere off the coast of Panama.
Yeah, so unless you want to end up in a Panamanian jail, we should probably handle this ourselves.
C, and not terribly far from shore, judging by the horizon, which means we're a simple map of Panama's coast away from our chart-filled fears being confirmed. But never fear, such a map is never seen in-game.
You devil.
But then resume your fear, because a far more damning map is. By forcing Drake to have a sudden fascination with geography mid-gunfight, we can sneak a peek at the computers inside the boat and spot a digital map displaying our current location, making this first chapter irrefutably, and dare I say unforgivably, charted. And that's absolutely not the only map seen in-game. In the outro cutscene of this same chapter, we already spot another, which details the entire area seen in the following 2 chapters. But let's all just calm down a moment. Before you light your pitchforks in anticipation of a 100% charted score, it's not quite that simple. Drake and Sully are actually only outside in this disgustingly charted territory for a small stretch before getting themselves neck deep in a long-lost temple. And while the Spanish were here before them, there's no charts, maps or floor plans anywhere on their bodies, meaning this entire section, and therefore the whole chapter, is actually uncharted. And this soggy stonework saves our necks once again in the very next chapter, thanks to everyone's favourite part of gaming, backtracking. And since Nate didn't draw up any kind of map the first time through, this bags the game another chapter of Uncharted status. The entire rest of the game takes place on a single island, and it's an island that may be the most charted location in the entire series, despite what the original soundtrack and Greg Edmondson may claim. Not you too, Greg, you're better than this. Drake finds his first map of the island on a dead body before finding a second copy of this map mere seconds later. And that's not all. A few hours later still, he finds yet another map of the same island drawn on a wall. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm crushingly disappointed by the whole landmass. And with its dirty map addiction exposed for us all to see, all purely exterior chapters from this point on officially have no place in this wonderfully Uncharted series. But if there's so much of this game that takes place outside, how are only these 4 chapters charted? Well, it's all down to how the exterior and interior content is laid out. With much of the game, like To the Tower, featuring long stretches of the nauseatingly charted great outdoors, with brief but undeniable indoor sections that, as part of a lost city, are assumed uncharted. However, not all interiors stay that way. This floor plan of the entire zombie-filled bunker built under the island ensures that both of these chapters are fully charted, and this hand-drawn diagram fully illustrates one of the final areas of the game. And it's actually worse than that. The underground isn't all that this drawing charts. It also maps out the entire church sitting above it, a church which is visited 3 times in the game due to it having more hidden passages than Swiss cheese with the lights off. This church being charted raises a whole lot of questions about the status of many late game chapters. Questions that I'll keep you waiting for the answers for, just cause I feel like it. The final point of interest is the final chapter, Showdown, which takes place on a boat in the ocean, much like the first chapter did. However, unlike that chapter, this boat's location is easily charted without hunting for any computer screens, since using this shot from the final cutscene, we can see our buoyant friend is still firmly floating in parchment range. So where do these results leave us in relation to the unchartedness of Drake's fortune? Well, That's a secret, isn't it? Because I've got 2 more games to inspect before I'll tell. From Uncharted 2 onwards, the repetitive jungles of the first game are gone and replaced by a whole host of varied locations such as snowy mountain ranges, museums, and yes, okay, more jungles, but most importantly, cities. And unfortunately for the series, with that addition comes plenty of chapters that automatically lose their Uncharted status. The museum that makes up the entirety of Breaking and Entering also suffers from this, but then goes on to rub its failure in our faces by having a map on screen too. The bloody cheek of it. Infrastructure is another thing that features more heavily this time around, and due to the necessity of planning such things, their very presence disqualifies these chapters from being declared Uncharted. Borneo is this game's return to the jungle environments found in Drake's Fortune, and might take the prize from the island in that game as the most charted location in the entire franchise. Drake finds this location by using a map, they plan their assault on the enemy camp using at least one other map, and Lazarevich's camp is chock full of maps of the same area too. Finally, not one to miss out on a bit of cartography, Nate begins this chapter with a complete hand-drawn map in his journal. The abundance of Borneo maps is undoubtedly terrifying, but of the 2 chapters taking place in Borneo, these many maps only successfully chart a single one. With an ancient temple full of very lazy doodlers to thank for this chapter remaining blissfully off the grid. So with this victory in hand, let's confront the enemy head on and look at the 3 remaining maps that Among Thieves contains. First comes this 3D map of a mountain range found in the Path of Light. Next is this paper map that Nate draws on to effectively copy that 3D map. And finally comes this map that him and Elena need to use when the big bad Lazarevich steals their second map. But what do they chart? Well, at least these 2 maps chart the area around the entrance to the Lost City, charting the short drive scene in Convoy, and by that logic, the mountain town that the convoy departs from as well. But that's not the end of it. The train derailment seen twice in-game is a simple walk from this now charted village, and also not terribly far from the already charted tracks, giving me no choice but to chart these chapters too. But it's not all bad. This deplorable document is actually somewhat of a double-edged sword. All of these monastery buildings being visibly uncharted can only mean that this area is hidden from the modern world, much like the lost city it protects. And therefore I can declare that the 2 chapters that take place here have successfully avoided all attempts at being mapped. Talking of the lost city, all chapters taking place here are also uncharted, despite this city having a wide open sky. I agree, this does mean it should be clearly visible from above, but, I mean, it isn't. So, assuming there's some kind of map-resistant magic at work, Shambhala successfully remains uncharted. Well, that's the second game wrapped up. And if you liked the clearly charted tourist locations that we've just covered, oh boy, are you going to enjoy the final game of the trilogy. Uncharted 3 opens with a chapter set entirely in a London pub, and this is followed by the second and third chapter, both set in the same few city blocks in Colombia. The fourth chapter takes us back to the streets of London, in an area that's actually quite a bit more fancy in real life, thank you, as well as taking us down into some service tunnels below the city, which, by necessity, will be mapped somewhere. There's also a chapter taking place in a very charted city in Yemen, and another in a tourist hotspot in Syria that even has a map in reception. However, there's a glimmer of hope that Drake's deception can recover from this appalling opening. Certain chapters in this game are lengthy, with long stretches taking place in locations that have fascinating arguments for why they're actually charted, but with an extra room or two bolted onto the end to spoil all my fun observations and drag the whole chapter kicking and screaming back into Uncharted status. And that's a good thing, of course. I'm not looking for these games to fail or anything. Next up is one of the areas that you might assume to be the most Uncharted of all, the Rhubarb Alley. However, not so much, since our baddie, Helen Mirren lookalike and all-round nasty piece of work Marlowe has been hunting around for this game's lost city for literal decades, and in her little hidey hole under London has accumulated a huge amount of maps of the desert. Honestly, you can't move for maps of the desert in this game. Even Nate's crew has a map that's far more detailed than anything Google Maps can offer. This map even charts the flight path of the plane that Nathan stows away on, meaning this whole chapter, crash and all, takes place within the boundaries of this pre-prepared document. Additionally, since this map shows the flight path all the way to the caravan you find later, Nate's sandy little saunter to get there is charted regardless of how lost he is. Chapters 12 and 13 take place amongst a jumble of shipwreckage and floating platforms, and since there's no reason to believe the pirates would have taken out a pen and paper and mapped out the layout of their super secret hideout, these chapters earn their Uncharted name. The next two chapters are where things go back to being a bit more complicated though. Now Nate is on a commercial cruise liner with construction plans inevitably laying around in shipyards and office drawers all over the world. And since Drake both gets to and leaves these boats in the time it takes for him to have a little Nathan nap, this cruise liner and all the hijinks on board are absolutely somewhere within the boundaries of this map. Well, those were the most important parts from all three games, and I know we all had a lot of fun, but now it's time for business. And finally time for me to give you all a clear answer to the video title, 16 minutes and 50 seconds or so into the video. Finally, we're at the good part. So let's look over our now complete data and find out once and for all how much of the Uncharted series' self-proclaimed Atlas abstinence is a big, dirty lie. Where better to begin than by looking at the complete results for the first Uncharted game. It received a lot of flack at the time for its repetitive jungle environments, and we found enough maps of these areas to feed a small family. So will this abundance of charts be a cartographical catastrophe, or are the first game's environments a lot more elusive than they first appear? Just how many of Drake's Fortune's 22 chapters are truly Uncharted? Not bad. Naughty Dog included just enough secret puzzle rooms, castle interiors and temples dotted throughout the game to ensure that just over half of the game's chapters included some kind of map-free exploration. Needless to say, this gets the series off to a great start, but can the next game replicate such a result? Uncharted 2, on one hand, featured far more inhabited and therefore immediately charted locations, but on the other hand had a totally uncharted endgame, something Drake's Fortune didn't have. Well, I won't keep you in suspense any longer, and let's cut to the chase. Just how many of Uncharted 2's 26 chapters are truly Uncharted? Ouch. Despite having 4 more chapters than Drake's Fortune, Uncharted 2 actually has fewer Uncharted chapters, thanks in part to these 3 troublesome maps causing huge damage that no amount of floor plan scrubbing sorcery can fix. Well then, it's all up to Uncharted 3 to save the day, and with its habit of elongating chapters out far past their usual length, it's not unlikely that most chapters have at least one room that's truly Uncharted. But with such a large amount of city locations, is that actually the case, or just a lot of wishful thinking? Just how many of Drake's Deception's 22 chapters are truly Uncharted? Come on, pick a side. Exactly half of Drake's Deception's chapters remain uncharted, and half fall prey to the temptations of topography. This game's actually so well balanced in this way that the game ends with 4 totally uncharted chapters to perfectly balance out the 4 charted ones it began with. Beautiful symmetry that we can all, no doubt, appreciate. But you know whose deservedness of appreciation we haven't established yet? Naughty Dog! And taking all 70 chapters from across the 3 games, I can reveal that the original Uncharted trilogy is 51.4% lies. So if you can't decide whether to overflow with anger and really dedicate your whole life to righting this wrong, I'd suggest flipping a coin. Well, that's that. And with this industry titan successfully put in their place, it's time for me to return to my masterpiece, my white whale. Excuse me, ma'am, have you seen any sleepy dogs? 100% lies. Hey, thanks for watching. This channel has a wealth of ridiculous content, so why not subscribe and stick around? I also tweet sillies over on my Twitter account, so tweet at me there to get noticed by Senpai. Thanks once again, and I'll see you next time.